I want to talk about two of my favorite themes today. One of them is a Hebrew concept of tikkun olam. Tikkun in Hebrew means healing, and olam is the word for world. And so there is this idea that we all have an obligation to do tikkun olam, to be part of healing the world. And the other favorite theme really is people who choose to do something that is about creating a more just world. So those are the two themes that I want to talk about, and I really want to introduce you to some of the people I've known over the past 30 years or more who have done that, and especially young people that I've worked with. And in doing that, it occurred to me how few... I thought of one school assembly that I was in when I was a sixth former in Lewis. So in 1976, the deputy head teacher, Mr. Crawford, one day told us that we had to go home that night and watch a documentary about the Vietnam War called Hearts and Minds. And there was something about the passion with which he told us that I did watch the film, and it had a big impact on me. And while I was thinking about today, I was thinking, but I don't remember any other school assembly in 13 years, except for one at primary school where the head teacher was crying because she was talking about the tragedy at Aberfan in Wales in 1966 when 116 children were killed. So that was all part of me thinking who are the people who come to mind whose work we could describe as tikkun olam. And I called this talk People Like Us because that's what I'm most interested in really, is working with people who are sometimes called ordinary people. I don't like that expression, but people like us who have chosen to do things that bring some sort of justice to the world. So in this 12 minutes or so that I want to introduce you to some of those people, and I want also to quote Margaret Mead, who you might have heard of, who has this famous quote where she says, "Never doubt that a small group of people have changed the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." Because I see that to be true when I think about these people and projects that I'm going to talk about. So the first one was when I was teaching in the Northeast in a school, Seatonburn High School, that was in a former mining community. I can't remember why it happened, but we set up an Amnesty International group. I can't remember the origin of that. And so lots of young people in the school had fundraising and assemblies. But what I remember most is how they used to sit at lunchtimes and do this mass letter writing. And in particular, I remember they were writing on behalf of a young boy in Afghanistan who was in prison for, I think, having the wrong book or saying the wrong thing. But their dedication to writing, obviously with thousands of other people in the world, the international letter writing campaign, and how it felt for them when he was freed. So I wanted just to mention them and that solidarity, because again, for me, nothing's more moving than when people who aren't affected feel a sense of solidarity with people who need their support. The next school event I want to mention, so 1992 in East London, the school called St Paul's Way. And what happened here was I had been working in Newcastle for years, and there a group of us made a film with Holocaust survivors and 12 school students from Newcastle. And it was a very powerful film. It was dialogue between the young people and the survivors. It was called Where Shall We Go? And I took the film and showed it to a group of mainly Bengali children in East London, and just to see how they felt, how they reacted to this film. And what has stayed with me for over 20 years is how they reacted to it as it was nothing to do with labels. So the survivors were Jewish, they were Muslims. All of that was irrelevant as they watched the film because it was about humanity. And the young people talked about how they saw their sister represented in the film. And two things that were, for example, I mean, they felt that it was fellow human beings whose experience was on the screen rather than people with labels. And two things that were said that day have stayed with me, and I've quoted them often in my work in education. I think the young people would be amazed, and this is part of what I want to talk about, the things we say and do that stay with people and have an impact. We have no idea of how long-lasting those are. So the two things that were said that day, one young woman said that the words of the people in the film had got inside her, And as a teacher, that's such a rare thing. You know, we hope that what we do goes inside you and helps form who you are and so on. But the truth is, of course, most of what we do is forgotten. But so it was very powerful when she said this testimony had got inside her. Another young man, just really thinking aloud, he said that it made him realise that it's his business to care about, say, people with people who are mentally ill or badly treated, say. It was his business to care about that and do something about it. And that concept of it's our business to care, that stayed with me. And I'd love to find them to tell them what they said had such an effect on me. The next event was in 1999, so I was teaching in Ilford, which is also East London. This is a Jewish comprehensive school, King Solomon. And in the year 9 group, there were loads of kids who used really abusive terms to each other, gay, packy, spastic. They would use refugee as a term of abuse, and it was so offensive and ingrained, and we tried all sorts of ways to stop it. It was really hard to affect, but something that did change that was I used to organise a speaker programme, and a man who was a Jewish Greek guy came to talk about how he was working to support Kosovan refugees because there was the war in Serbia at the time, and his family had been rescued by Albanian Muslim people, and his mum had told him, if ever Albanians are in trouble, you must help them. Because Albanians rescued thousands of Jewish people by hiding them and protecting them. And so he, in England, because we had Kosovan refugees here, he had dedicated his life to helping them. And his talk was so passionate that 4 students came to me afterwards and said, this time we want to do something. So rather than it just being a speaker. So then we set up a project in the school and invited young refugees to come and talk in the assembly. And they talked about their escape here, hiding under lorries and all sorts. And the assembly had such an impact on these year 9 students who had used these terms of abuse. So they couldn't do enough. For months and months they came to say, what can I do? You know, so these kids who'd used refugee as a term of abuse, through meeting the actual refugees, began this whole campaign of raising money and awareness and contacting the media and so much support for local refugees. So that stayed with me, that example. And the next one, this one is, so 10 years ago, and a group of us who set this project up are now evaluating it to see its long-term effect, and it has really stayed in the lives of lots of people. So Youth Act is a project that trains adults and young people together to address issues of their concern in their community. So this was a majority in Tottenham in London, and the community groups chose to address gun crime or their housing estates or the bullying in their school. And the people I remember most from this are those who started off perhaps too shy to say their own name. You know, one of them, he used to blush to say his name, another one used to come out in hives to say his name. But after doing this campaigning work and seeing the impact they had, so for example, they got Newsnight to come and film their housing estate, which shamed the council into improving it, or they organised big marches through Tottenham against gun crime, which got lots of publicity, or they set up anti-bullying strategies in their school that really affected people's behaviour, and to see their confidence grow. So they ended up, one of them, the one who blushed, ended up speaking to government ministers about what they'd done, and the other one who came out in hives ended up running a national anti-bullying campaign, and one of them has since won a Queen's Award. The school has won a Queen's Award for this anti-gun crime work they do, which is now embedded in the community. And so there are lots of lessons to learn from that about, again, solidarity, intergenerational groups, persistence, all sorts of things, just very, very powerful, and starting small. That's the other thing I want to say. No, this isn't about people running the United Nations. It's small acts on local level, having a big, big impact often. So that was Youth Act and one of the rallies. So they still do the rallies, and it's part of the school life and part of the community life, and it lives on. This example, not so much about young people, but it could be. This was me in 2009 listening to the radio one morning, and there was news that a woman in Sudan, Lubna Hussein, who was a journalist at the UN, so she was quite influential, she was going to be flogged for wearing trousers, and she was going to a court case to be tried. And so as a woman in London, it was so inconceivable to me that I might be arrested, for wearing trousers. And so I got on the phone, and including to Sudanese people, and a group of us organised a protest at the embassy and told the police, got a megaphone, told the press, and about 80 people turned up. Some said they were ironing and heard it on the radio and put down their ironing and came to join us. And that was just to add to the international protest. And my point really is the ease with which you can do things because we all listen to the news and think, that's so terrible, what can I do? And sometimes you can't do something, and sometimes you can. And the Syria this year was about, I was at an event at Christmas, and a man was talking about the Kindertransport of 1938, when 10,000 Jewish children were rescued here. And it begged the question, what are we doing now about all the thousands of Syrian families who are freezing to death in camps? And why isn't there equivalent response here now, as there was in 1938, 200 committees of non-Jewish people who lobbied the government to let Jewish people in? Just by asking the question, the man who was giving the talk then set up a campaign called 10,000 Homes. So that wasn't me doing it, but it was the question that prompted him, and that's a current campaign. So again, an example of a small thing leading to a big thing. That was the protest at the embassy. This was to do with the project about being very hard to bear the fact that millions of older people in our country are lonely and isolated and never speak to anyone and never get hugged. And so for years talked about what can we do about that, and then ended up with people setting up a project that was volunteers being trained to offer hand massage to older people living at home, just as a way of companionship and comfort and touch. So it sort of fits that theme of what can you do if you have an idea, what can you do about it? Actually, before that, I want to show you this, which is the final project I want to talk about, which is a current one, Journey to Justice. This was inspired by visiting American museums to do with civil rights, and the whole universal message of that American civil rights movement about what can happen when people join together about one issue, happened to be about racism, but it could be about anything, and what can we learn from that extraordinary campaign that ended up with such solidarity and strength and publicity and support, and has inspired other social justice movements in the world. And so a group of us now have set up this Journey to Justice to create a travelling exhibition here about the American civil rights movement and its impact on the world, to inspire people now who might want to get involved in social justice work. And that's a picture of a Memphis sanitation workers' strike. So the treatment of black bin men in 1968 was, I can't even tell you the treatment, so they weren't allowed to shower and they weren't allowed to shelter, and so two hid in a dumpster and were mashed up and killed because they weren't allowed to shelter because it was raining, and that triggered a strike that Martin Luther King went to support, and that's where he was murdered. So that picture of them with those banners, "I am a man," is one of the iconic pictures from that campaign. And I wanted to end with too many quotes, but just if you look at the top one, "This is your world, shape it or someone else will," is something that I feel so strongly that you're not future citizens, you are citizens, it's your world, and you have the potential, your voice and your actions have the potential to shape it. Because I've seen it happen time and again, but we have to do it together. So that's really the main message of what I want to say.